Hi, this is Greg with Lionquestfitness. Today, last installment of the Smith & Wesson 640 versus the Taurus 856 CH. So let's talk about it. Now, the whole point of this series is that you can take a gun like this, a relatively inexpensive gun, a budget gun, and you can work with it and make it work just as well as you can a much more expensive firearm. Also, expensive firearms, just because they're expensive and because they may have higher quality materials, does not always mean that the design and the fitting is and the quality control is what it should be. And as well, you take a gun like this and they're fairly well designed. In fact, I'll say they're very well designed, but they could benefit from higher quality of materials, such as the screws, and they could also benefit from better fitting. And we're going to talk more about this. So let's talk about some problems I've had with both firearms. So let's talk about the 640 first. Now, as we talked about, that barrel is slightly canted, not a lot. Within 10 yards, within 7 yards, it's a very accurate firearm, which is what this is made for, close quarters. Now, one of the other problems I had, and this seems to be something that happens frequently on the newer Smith & Wesson revolvers, or at least I've had it happen to 2 of them, is the cylinder release latch falls off. Screw gets loose from shooting, and unexpectedly you lose that latch, and then you can't open the cylinder to reload your gun. Once you find the problem and realize the problem, and you find your latch and the screw that goes in the latch, blue Loctite will take care of it. Alright, now let's talk about some problems I've had with this Taurus 856CH. And as you can see, I've put the original grips back on, mainly because I can actually shoot better with these grips, and they're not quite as thick as the other grips, the wooden grips I had on it. So it's kind of a trade-off. These are easy to get out of concealment, but I believe the Taurus grips are very well designed grips. Now, this is my daughter's Taurus 85, and now these grips really work well with this gun and really set it off. Isn't that beautiful looking? These came from Thailand. Alright, so anyway, I've had several sets of grips on this gun, and anybody who's changed the grips on a Taurus revolver know that it's hard to get that roll pin out. And I highly recommend that you go ahead and that you remove the cylinder and the crane before you do so. And be very careful, because once you remove that cylinder screw, there's 3 parts. And there's a very, very small spring that goes in there, so you don't want to lose that. I banged the grips off with that roll pin. Had to set it between 2 wooden boxes so I wouldn't damage the cylinder. And that's why I say take the cylinder and the yoke out first. And then I put a pair of square butt grips on the gun. Now, it could have been the rough treatment. It could have been how I was shooting the gun. Because with those square butt grips, I actually had my 2 bottom fingers underneath the bottom of the grip. And I was putting all my pressure on the bottom of the trigger rather than square in the center of the trigger. I was pushing down and up slightly. And I was doing a lot of dry fire like that. And I was shooting at the range like that when all of a sudden the cylinder just started free floating. And what had happened, the cylinder latch had gotten depressed because there's a spring that holds that latch in place, and it had gotten kinked. Well, at that time I didn't realize what the problem was. I was going to put the original grips back on to send it to Taurus. I'm banging, once again, banging that roll pin in and out. And then the spring went back, and the gun's worked fine since, except for one other problem. Alright, so I'm at the range one day, and I'm shooting at 15 yards. And I'm only loading 2 bullets in, 2 158 grain bullets. And I'm setting my cylinder. And I'm doing the very, very, very slow staging the trigger. But all of a sudden, the cylinder begins to free float. And I'm like, okay, what gives here? So I loaded some empty cartridge casings in, loaded 2 more live rounds, and no problem. So I loaded 2 more rounds in. I took the empty cartridges out. I loaded 2 more rounds in. And this time, rather than staging the trigger, I went ahead and pulled straight back. No problem. So what was happening there? And so I did some research on the Taurus armed.net forum. Very good forum, by the way. And as it turns out, a certain percentage of these guns, maybe 5%, 7%, maybe 10%, have issues with the cylinder not engaging and not rotating properly. And it may be as simple as, my problem, where it had to be very specific, only 2 rounds, heavy bullets, and staging a long stage to the trigger, But others, it a little bit more serious, such as with my friend Gun Sam Revolver Aficionado, and some people reporting that they couldn't get the cylinder to turn properly at all. And one of the problems they ran into by sending them back to Taurus, Miami, is that the gunsmiths there didn't really know how to address the issue. And as I did the research and I read, a lot of people have found that it's the hand was not fitted properly, and that was what was causing the cylinder not to turn. And some of the enterprising folks on that forum actually took the hand out and did some work on it and shaved some material off to where it fit better. I would not recommend that, but that seems to be a problem that Taurus hadn't really acknowledged yet, or really doesn't know, how to address. Now that brings up another issue, and that is quality control, and that is across the board with firearms and with all manufacturing. And it has to do pre-COVID and post-COVID. This is a Taurus 856 I bought several years ago, before COVID. Never had any problem with the cylinder turning or anything to do with the gun other than I needed to tighten the cylinder screw up, put a little Loctite in there. And I've found, as I've looked at different guns, as I've read, statements and stories by FFLs about having to return firearms, that it's across the board. Smith & Wesson, Ruger, they're getting sent back a lot because of poor quality control. Same thing with Taurus. I looked at a Colt revolver not too long ago, the King Cobra. It was a King Cobra snub. I couldn't get the cylinder open. I was considering buying it. And when the FFL and I finally got the cylinder open, inside the frame, it was so rugged and so many sharp edges and burrs. That's why you couldn't get the cylinder out. And you know, that's a problem in quality control that comes from the factory. And unfortunately, we're in a state right now that quality control, due to all the things that's happened over the last few years in manufacturing, is not very good. So will that change? Hopefully so. Would I recommend a gun like this? Well, you know, you might get a lemon. More than likely you're going to get a cherry. Or you may get a gun that you might have to work with a little bit and figure out the strengths and weaknesses. Now, once again, these are well-designed guns. It just needs a little bit better fitting and more quality control as far as the steel for some of the parts, such as the screws. And it's a good self-defense gun, good for getting down close quarters. All right, now how about that Smith & Wesson? Now, I love this gun. Man, this goes all the way back to Rex Applegate in the design of this gun. This is a very good, sleek, get out of concealment gun. And I did go back to the Bataleur grips because I really like thicker grips for this gun rather than the hideout grips I had on it. And it's still concealable, still can be pocket carried. And if you can afford a gun like this, all steel, you're going to get more accuracy, a little bit harder to pocket carry because of the weight, but not impossible. But I highly recommend this gun if you can afford it, if you can find one. I think this is probably the epitome of a concealed carry revolver, and one that can come out very easily and can do the job and get you out of whatever situation you're in. But just because I like this gun, just because I feel like the quality is there, doesn't mean that a gun like this can't work either. And this is Greg with Lionquestfitness reminding you, always be prepared for the unexpected.
Hey,